Yo, my peoples, what's up? Welcome back to Shelf Stories, the channel that tells tales from games, books, and life. And also welcome to the One Stop Co-op Shop podcast. I am your host, Jason. Thank you so much for stopping by because we are going to make some good trouble. I am kicking off the new year. We're getting into it. We are blowing up more topics, expanding topics that we have I started, last year. We talked about culture. We talked about gender. We talked about, all sorts of things. I want to expand my portfolio a bit and talk more about the environment. Diversity inclusion includes Mother Earth. We don't have anything without that. And I know it could be a very touchy subject, but that's what Good Trouble is all about, to really help folks understand what's going on. And to that end, here is a creator who is, I think, offering a lot in terms of education, in terms of an ability to have good, honest conversations about this, but that opens a way forward for discussion. I really appreciate her vibe. She feels the Good Trouble too. So it's like, whenever somebody is in that mode, that cut in that middle of like, okay, we're going to be honest, but we're going to talk about it too, I gotta reach out. I've followed her channel for the last year, and it's been growing and it's been wonderful to see. And I've been educated myself, and I want to ask about some of the things on the channel. I know my intros are long, but I love watching the guests just squirm, be like, wow, when's he going to stop talking? This is the One Pip Wonder. She is Jona Minotto. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jason. That was a very kind intro.
I love watching you squirm. The more you squirm, the longer the intro is going to be.
Oh gosh.
No, sell it. That's the only way you make the intro short. Anyway, so we're going to talk about board games through the lens of environmental sustainability. And we're going to try to have like we do all the time here in Shelf Stories, an intelligent conversation that is honest. And the way I'm framing it, and I told Jona before the call, I want to frame it as good news, bad news and good news, because there's a lot of not so great news. And I think we need to be honest about where it's coming from. But I think there's this gut instinct to kind of resist it and like, oh, why are you talking about this? Why are you bothering me? And so that's where a lot of the resistance comes from. But we'll talk about that. But we're gonna acknowledge that resistance, then we're gonna try to move through it and get to a better place. So good news, near the end of the show. Looking forward what we can do.
Gotcha.
So that's the way we're gonna do. But we need to get to know Jona first. Jona, please, tell us, who you are, where you're from, and a little bit about your channel.
Sure. Well, my name is Jona Minotto, and I've been reviewing board games on YouTube and doing some segments for the Dice Tower over the last 2 to 3 years. And just this past year, I really found my voice and really realized that what I wanted to focus on was the environment and sustainability in board gaming, because it really wasn't a conversation I was having with anyone. And I wanted to see that change. So
where does that come from in your life? Is that something that is a part of your profession? Is that something that is a personal passion?
It's something that's always been on my mind. When I was a kid, I was very aware of the environment. In fact, I was looking at some sketchbooks from when I was like 7 or 8, and I had been drawing pictures of like trash and like little kids being really sad. I'm like, wow, this goes way back. This is pretty deep, I guess. So anyway, it's just always something I've been very sensitive about and had a heart for. And
there's definitely I'm sorry, there's different I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's different modes. Like you can, because the environmental movement isn't one thing. Like it's changed. And you can, so like the environmental movement in the 60s is different than the 70s, 80s, 90s, and all that kind of stuff. So like if you grew up in a certain era, it would be like acid rain. That was a big thing. Or like there would be the hole in the ozone layer. That was the big thing.
Haunt, like I was so terrified of that when I was growing up, because I learned all about that. And what really happened was like Canada, they cut the emissions that were causing the ozone layer, and it really saved it. Like it's healed essentially. Like Mother Earth can heal itself. And I was like, wow, I can't believe that they were able to fix that, but we still have these bigger issues that we're dealing with. And when I was young, a lot of my anxiety about the environment, like my parents knew it was weighing on me. And I mean, I'm a Christian, so we would just pray about it and give it to the Lord and be like, God is in control.
Mhm.
And I absolutely believe that. But I also see that the way people treat the world hasn't changed since I was a child. And now that I'm an adult, I feel like it's my responsibility to make things better and to speak as an advocate for the planet and for future generations. So I
Awesome.
know that sounds like this big thing, but it's really like I don't have a big platform, but I'm going to use what I
Mhm.
have to try to influence people to do more for the planet and to be more mindful
You're
of the
officially part of the
planet.
Shelf Stories family. Come on in. You're making the trouble you're talking about. I mean, it sounds so, and I guess that maybe that's a social thing where talking about the environment, like I talked about the pushback, right? So it's like whenever you mention
Yeah,
this environment stuff, the assumption is that we're making trouble and we're making people feel bad. And
right.
that's a
Yeah,
thing that is whatever. But another aspect of it is that, like caring about like our what our grandchildren do, caring about what happens in 2100 has somehow become like this Pollyanna thing. And it's like,
yeah,
no, I have a daughter and she's gonna
yeah,
procreate, and what kind of world are they going to live in? And the
right.
projections from really smart people are not looking good right now. So I want to be able to talk about that without that
Yeah,
sense of like, oh, well, you're just being Pollyannish and you're just being whatever. Like you could be a really
yeah.
serious person
No,
to
it's
talk
it
about
is
this.
really serious. If you research it at all, you realize like it's not looking good if we don't change the amount of carbon emissions that we're putting out in the environment. If we don't make changes,
Right.
it is not going to be good in the next 2, 3 generations. Like that is reality. So for me and my husband, we started making changes over um, the last 2 years. We actually got solar panels on our roof. We recently bought a new house and were able to invest in that. We didn't redo the kitchen, we put solar panels on the house. So that's just a really important thing for us because we want to be able to tell our sons, like, we did everything we could, or at least we tried.
Mhm.
So to change our ways and to be an influence on others, like just making personal choices, it inspires others and gets people to ask questions.
Mhm.
So this is something that over the years I've just been making more and more switches for eco-friendly things. And as I've had the opportunity to invest, we've always tried to invest in reducing our carbon footprint. And so it just struck me as really weird that when I would go to buy a luxury item like a board game, there was absolutely no sustainable option.
Mm.
Like no one's talking about using FFC wood in board games when board games are primarily made out of wood. And no
And
one's talking
paper, yeah.
about
Mhm.
reducing plastic
Mhm.
or like how can we just make it better, more sustainable. And that first struck me as odd. But then when I started working with T. Kairas from Haba USA,
Mhm.
I was really struck by a lot of things that they were sharing with me about the Haba products. Like they would say things like we're using more and more recycled cardboard because a lot of other companies are moving away from that. And that really struck me as odd. I'm like, why is that? Like, if they're able to pursue more recycled materials, why shouldn't we be pushing that
Mhm.
in every aspect of the hobby? Like,
Mhm.
adults should have eco friendly board games too, not just kids.
Right.
So, a lot of my questioning came from learning what other brands were doing and realizing, like, oh, people aren't talking about this. Publishers aren't talking about this. Manufacturers may be talking about it, but it's not happening in the spotlight. Like it's not
Mhm.
happening with consumers being aware of it.
Right.
So that's really where I
Mhm.
realized that I wanted to pursue this.
Right. I mean, I guess it's such an interesting thing about like, it seems obvious, right? If you just open a science textbook or if you look at 5 minutes of the data, I'm a psychotherapist, and the most nervous client that I've ever had in my entire life wasn't like a financial anxiety person, wasn't necessarily, all these things you would think would be anxiety inducing, like a fighter pilot. The most nervous person was a climate scientist. That
Mm,
person came in and they were like melting down, ready to buy property in Iceland because, or, you know, like, and like move their family there
yeah.
because I don't know what's going to
Yeah.
happen. And, you know, it's because they're, and that's why the movie Don't Look Up, which we talked both agree with and discussed, was, you know,
Yeah.
a thing, you know, on Netflix. So go ahead and check out Don't Look Up. It's a climate metaphor. And
Yeah.
the motif is that, you know, you have these really smart people who see danger coming and they're yelling into the void. No one's listening
Yeah.
because, you know, the media and are just our comfort, you know, just like
Yeah.
regular people don't want to be disturbed. And I think part of what has happened, I know this is kind of big picture conversation that we'll get to the board games in a minute, but I think it's important to lay this track a little bit because I don't just want to come off as we're attacking board games. We're not. We want to make them better.
No. Yeah.
The context, like, you know, we have been talking about this stuff. Like you mentioned before, you were drawing trash in your, you know, thing when you were like 7 years old. You know, it can get a little bit shrill, you know, so it's like, you know, An Inconvenient Truth from Al Gore came out in like the mid 2000s. And, you know,
Yeah.
you had all these
Yeah.
different, you know, Greenpeace has been doing quote unquote eco-terrorism for so long. And so like the message has been out there, the world is ending, the world is ending, the world's ending, and the world hasn't ended
Yeah.
yet for us. So it's like, it's almost like a lot of people give themselves permission to check out and like,
Mhm.
let's just go for nicer stuff anyway. Like, I mean, oh, eco-friendly, people have been talking about eco-friendly for so long. So like they are, as humans, if we don't see something, we just go the other way. And it's like, okay, well,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna worry about that. World's not gonna end. Let me go ahead and do UV coating on my game, or let's do, you know, make it look good, make it all chrome and all that kind of stuff. We'll definitely talk about chrome. uh but so I think it's like, you know, eventually that the message has become a little bit of boy cries wolf,
Yeah.
because like, okay, the world's in the world's and the world's ending. Meanwhile, like the apocalypse doesn't look like that. It's more slow. Like
Yeah.
you know, it's slow warming. It's,
Mhm.
you know, slightly more devastating floods and, you know, stronger rains and bigger droughts, and like this thing just kind of happens over years and years. So like when you hear like the shrill world ending message, you know, what they're saying is we're on a bad track. Not that the world will end tomorrow, but that we're on a bad track.
Right.
And
Right.
saying something reasonable like you're on a bad track is not getting the attention.
Mhm.
Plenty of people
And
are putting that mess, but they're not getting the attention. Unfortunately, though, that bad track is really starting to bite us a little bit.
right. And the to to go with your picture there of like being on a bad track, it's not only that we're going the wrong direction, but we're like a freight train with a whole lot of weight going
Right.
one direction full speed. People aren't putting the brakes on reducing the amount of coal and oil and plastic. People are still using and making plastic,
Right.
virgin plastic. It's being produced every day, and we know it's not going anywhere. And
Right.
it just is a little like it is gradual, but it's also like if we don't at least slow down and maybe start to like turn the
Mhm.
tracks in a new direction, um, it could end. And I think that's the big thing is people are truly unable to imagine the world ending. And I
Right.
think part of like watching that movie, like you mentioned, looking up, that was so for someone who's worried about the future and worried like, you know, what my grandchildren's future will look like, to see the world end was very I don't know, it was almost a healthy thing to kind of like feel that pain and like
Mhm.
see it and just be able to like, yes, someone else sees what I am worried about and what I like stay at night thinking about.
Right.
So it was kind of like someone validating your worries that no one else is seeing.
There's a lot of people who like, I feel seen with this, with the Don't Look Up movie.
Yes.
It's a really popular one. I mean, it's a hard thing to look at. I mean, there's so much new science. I mean, and where this is going to be like a crash course, not even a crash course. I mean, because Jonna and I obviously have been reading up on this stuff, like we can't help it.
Yeah.
And so like bits and bobs come in there. So like you hear like the UN report, in 10 years, we're going to hit this irreversible course, and life is going to be, very hard to deal with in 2100 or whatever it is. And that's a UN report. It's right there. Or
Yeah.
like, the Antarctic ice shelf is like experiencing these massive cracks and all this kind of thing. And that,
Right.
and it's like, and they're saying like, okay, maybe Miami will be gone in 10 years. And, and this is one of these like truly inconceivable things.
Yeah.
And I don't know. So I think when Jonah and I kind of, started to, chat and get together, I think like, what can we do?
Yeah.
What can we do? And John has made some changes in her individual life, and I've kind of, trying to, platforming different people who are focused on this stuff. Like, let's talk about that. Let's talk about like what's happening in our industry, because
Mhm.
it does matter. Like, you talked about plastic. That's all of board gaming.
Yeah.
How much
Yeah.
plastic? How much plastic is up with it? For the podcast, I'm holding my camera up. Like I have a lot of plastic up there. I have Next
Yeah, there
Millions. I
is.
have Assassin's Creed is like a huge box. 3/5 of it are just plastic, not just the minis, but the inserts.
Mhm.
And as Kickstarters have gone on, and as as the hobby is kind of deluxified, we're just like plastic. So we want to like, let's give them the bad news, Jonna.
Okay, well, the bad news is complicated because not everyone, let's see, how can I put this? Like, I think the bad news is that people underestimate that the things that they purchase have a lifespan that is going to be a lot longer than their life.
Yeah, okay.
For
Good way to put
example,
it.
plastic has a lifespan of between 400 and like 1,000 years. They don't really know because it's still around and we've only had it for like 100 years. And
Mhm.
from what they can tell, it's going to be around a lot longer. So we're kind of dealing with this like unknown that we just kind of know is really bad. And I think that people just don't take that into account is the bad news.
Mhm.
And
Well, I mean, the sense that like, why are plastics bad? I think
well,
that we need a
because
little bit of a
plastic,
basic
okay,
primer.
a little bit more base. Okay, yeah, plastics are bad because they don't biodegrade. Even bioplastics, which could be made from like a plant-based plastic, will not biodegrade in the next 10 or 20 years. Like it takes hundreds of years for it to break down. And because it doesn't decompose, it just gets broken down into tinier and tinier pieces, which is called microplastic. Microplastic is like 5 centimeter or smaller. And what they find is that it just gets smaller and smaller to the point where you have to filter it out of water, and to the point where plants actually absorb it into their roots and it's in our food system, to the point where fetuses have microplastics in them. They found microplastics in like baboons, like it's everywhere. And the facts are a little blurry because they don't really know the negative
Mhm.
impacts that it will have on humans. But
Like I remember
they,
when I was a kid, they would show like the 6-pack, like a plastic pack, and like a
okay,
dolphin getting caught in the 6-pack.
yeah. Well,
Like think of it that way.
this is like invisible six packs, like getting caught inside your intestines. Like
Mm.
it's really strange. I mean, they don't know all the research, but there is more and more coming in that it can kill cells at the level where you're digesting it. Like, and this is like when I was growing up, I'm not sure I was ingesting as much plastic as my children probably are.
Mm.
And so it's just kind of like at this point unchecked, but we do know that it's there, and more than likely it will be harmful. A lot of
Mhm.
people have in like digestional issues, and a lot of the people that they have found like they had a higher content of microplastic in their bodies. So I mean, we're just starting to learn what these effects are going to be, and
Right.
that's kind of the worst news, that we don't really know how bad it's going to be
Yeah.
because it's
And
already in progress.
and
And
even a conversation like this will, I think as a culture, we've gotten used to this idea that like, a board game collection is mine. I'm buying it for me.
Mhm.
What happens to your board games when you pass on?
Yeah. Well, a lot of people feel that they will be inherited and that their children will, take on those board games and love them. And if not, they will store them. But I think that is a little idealistic.
Hmm.
Maybe your grandchildren will want to buy their own board games or like something new. And the fact is that most of this stuff will end up in the environment at some point.
Right.
And there is an environmental cost. Like you pay for a game and it has like a cost on your pocketbook, but then there's an environmental cost. So
Hmm.
I think that's what a lot of people don't consider. The other thing, should I keep going?
Well, I talk about, so like the subtlety in which plastic plays out in board games. It's not just the minis,
Mhm.
right? I mean,
No, it's not. Yeah.
we think about, when we think about plastics, we think about, I mean, minis are the obvious thing,
Think
they
about
leak out and
minis. You
everything.
think
Yeah.
about plastic box inserts. A lot of
Mhm.
people talk about card sleeves, but I mean, card sleeves are usually bought extra and added. Like I don't know. I don't begrudge people card sleeves because usually people put them on games that they really love and they're trying to make last longer. So
Right.
there is like a durability effort there. But I think it is wasteful to do it for every game that you own. That's just me personally. But card sleeves aside, then we also have spot UV printing
Right.
or just UV printing,
Tell
which
them
is
what that
a
is.
plastic. It is a plastic finish. It is clay, plaster, and it is polymer. So, I mean, as luxe as we like to think our spot UV finishes, it's just plastic. And so when that biodegrades, like the cardboard will eventually, go back into the earth, and that's great, but the plastic will is already a microplastic. So that will just flake apart and could end up in a water source or
Mhm.
a landfill. Hopefully, it would be safer in a landfill, but that is plastic already broken down into tiny microscopic bits that we have to account for.
Mhm.
And for me, I feel like spot UV is one of the easiest things we should opt out of if we're looking to reduce the environment because it is an aesthetic thing.
Right.
Um, I know that some publishers are switching to a spot UV or a UV printing to make the boxes more durable in lieu of like shrink wrap, which I like. I understand you're like problem solving, but ultimately I'd rather take the shrink wrap and put it in the garbage and take care of it rather than, 30 or 40 years from now, if the plastic break apart off of my board game. So
Mhm. Yeah, I mean,
that's
so,
another topic. So
and I think that's why I wanted to get into the more granular stuff,
yeah,
because it's in the granularity that you get the potential for solutions, right? Because it isn't going to
right.
be, I think, in terms of that backlash, in terms of like, oh well, you're going to take away my games and not give me anything in return. That's
Yeah,
really what triggers stuff. But it's like, let's break apart the problem and figure out if there are these little points where
right.
we can make a change. So like spot UV is a perfect, that in fact it was your spot UV episode, which is on One Pip Wonder. Go ahead and give him a like and subscribe. That actually inspired me to be like, I have to talk about this.
Mm,
Because it's just like I like when we can really take apart something and it's
yeah.
like, okay, look at this, look at spot UV, look at game trays inserts.
Yeah,
um
game tray inserts are a big one.
mhm,
They
look,
are made out of a black plastic that's flimsy. It's not a desirable plastic. If you look on it, most box inserts do not have the Chasing Arrows logo, which is what they use to identify what type of plastic it is. It doesn't have it on it. That's garbage.
mm,
It cannot go in the recycling system. And it's often a tool or it's used to make the box more bloated to look more valuable. So a box insert will make a tiny deck of cards look like a big game. So that's like another aspect to it that is not environmentally friendly by bloating up
right.
our games and increasing the environmental footprint overall.
Like,
So
expansions, like that's a big bugaboo for gamers, right? Like I'm excited about this expansion. I get this like kind of sizable
yeah,
box, and then
hmm
inside is a deck of cards.
yeah,
And
that's it.
a deck of cards, and like, okay, well, that's one of all sneaky. Thank you very much for
Hmm.
being sneaky on me. Number two, how are you filling that box out? That box isn't getting filled out by, feathers.
Right.
It's all
It's
plastic because it has to be
packaging.
held in and all that kind of
Yeah.
thing. You mentioned before that the game trays are using like a bad kind of plastic. Are they like different levels of it? Are some plastics better than others, or is that
Well, I'm not a scientist. I don't really know. I'm not a specialist, but from what I understand, the chasing arrows with the number one is usually a clear plastic, and that's most desirable and most usable. Usually, that's a white, or I'm sorry, the clear water bottles, and they can be turned into new clear water
okay?
bottles. That's the most common recycling that is used in like food. The next one would be like a white plastic, similar to milk bottles. So that's very easy to recycle. That becomes new milk bottles. When you get into different colors and different qualities of plastic, it becomes harder and harder to reuse. So the thin black plastic is just, it's not a durable, it's not like a high quality plastic. And if it doesn't even have the chasing arrows on, I really wouldn't know what it is, but it wouldn't be something you could put in your like recycling bin and take it out to the street.
Mhm.
So that's what I know. I just know, and I also know that
That's more than what I know. I learned something.
only about 9% of plastics that are collected actually become a new product. The majority of what's collected ends up in the garbage or in landfills anyway. So it's really something that we're kind of fed and told that it's a good thing to recycle, recycle, recycle. But really the good work that's being done, it's very small. We're not
Mhm.
actually using a lot of the plastics that are being collected. And so a lot of people assume that the plastics that they're buying are recycled because we're like, well, there's so much of it, they must be using it. The truth is there isn't. The majority of the plastics in our board games, not the majority, all the plastics in our board games
Right.
are virgin plastics.
Mm.
Lego is a multi-million-dollar brand, and they just last year announced a big announcement. We're using recycled plastic for our bricks, and they're white and they're plain and they're boring, but they're recycled. This is like huge news. A toy company has actually figured out a way to reuse our old plastic. So it's really important for people to know, like, it's very uncommon for old plastics to be used because it's not good quality and it's not consistent and it's expensive. Virgin plastic is way more cheaper and it looks
Mhm.
better. So that's why it's always being used in manufacturing.
Okay,
So,
so I mean, there's so much there, and I want to kind of jump off of some of those points. The idea of virgin plastics being more desirable, and the
mhm,
idea of virgin more plastics kind of like selling better. Like we're not just going off of people's feelings, right? We're not just saying triggering people's feelings for no reason. Like we're not only are we trying to help people understand, we're going against profit motive,
yeah.
right? And that's why we're in this mess in the first place, is because of profit motive. And so companies have a motive to please consumers, right?
Mhm.
And the more pleasing things are the very things that, if you look at any Kickstarter page, what what we're asking for. It's like, if you kind of blue pill, red pill type. So if you're doing blue pill, just like you're just like enjoying games, it's like, oh yeah, game trays and
Oh yeah.
minis and
We'll take
spot
the
UV.
minutes. Yep.
And
Custom
actually,
dice.
I hope Jamie Stegmeyer is watching the show. Hi, Jamie. He does watch the show from time to time, and like he talks about how I think this was when he was making Tapestry, where the game could look a certain way and it'll cost X amount of money, but then for very little cost, he can add spot UV and deluxe components and all this other plastic. Like this stuff is super cheap, like you were mentioning
Yeah,
before. So
it
like for
is.
an extra, whatever it is, $10 to the publisher, he can sell his game for another 30.
Mhm.
And the publisher, from the publisher end, that's like hand in a cookie
Yeah.
jar. You give me free money. And from a consumer end, we're like, oh, we're getting this great deal. But that's like blue pill type stuff.
Yeah.
Red pill, you see, like, once you've kind of realizing, okay, we're using the virgin plastics, we're using the cheaper woods, and we're using all, the shipping from China, or whatever these other practices that, like, make things cheaper, these things that Kickstarter backers are asking for on a daily basis. It's almost like you're seeing a hit list of, oh, there goes another one from Mother Earth. There goes another one from Mother Earth. There goes no. You ever get that feeling that's like, oh my God, what are these people asking for?
I know. It really is. It is really hard because you don't want to kill people's joy. A lot, like our hobby is escapism. Our hobbies are luxury. But I definitely feel kind of like punched in the gut when I see people wanting like plastic corners on their boxes for shipping so that they come perfectly. I'm like, do you know how much extra plastic that is? That's just for like getting it to your house, and they had to pay some worker to put those 8 corners on your box and all this extra stuff. And yeah, it didn't cost you anything extra. You love it, but there was a lot of cost involved. There was manual labor involved with that, and there was also environmental costs with that. And I know you think it's great, but it's just like poison to me when I see that.
We want to hit that middle, right? We want to, we don't want to be killjoys. We don't want to hammer people, but at the same time, there is a cost. Like, and I think that's kind of the message here,
right? That you want to, like, sure, if you want plastic in your game, like, for example, one of my favorite games is Project L, and it's probably one of the most unenvironmentally friendly games I own, because every single piece of that game is plastic or has spot UV on it. But I play it all the time, and I do really love it. And I'm like, well, maybe that's my one cheat. Like, I have this one game that I really love, but then maybe the next game could be more, environmentally friendly. I also don't know where I'm going with this. My brain is just everywhere.
Well,
but
I mean, I think you pointed to something excellent there, where it's like, we're not against this stuff, and there's a utility there. Like, sleeving cards, and like there's, having nicer, like, I remember Eric Lang that tells a story about Blood Rage, where, the minis are chunky, right? And he would just walk by and pick up one of the minis and throw them against the wall. And then, and then pick up the mini, put it back, and be like, okay, look at the sturdiness of this mini. And, the idea that, like,
so that's what game designers do. I see.
The idea that, like, sometimes, people hear eco-friendly, and they think like flimsy and cheap, and like, it's going to biodegrade in my table. Like, you're going to get 5 uses out of it and whatever. And it's like, well, that's not what we want. We want people to have joy. It's just our current model not only is deluxifying, like, deluxify is okay. It's just the volume of it. Every game is deluxified.
Right.
Like, and we're pushing more and more, like, every Kickstarter, and there's this pressure on publishers to offer the nicer thing, to offer the game trace, to offer, and we're focusing on plastics a lot because that's a lot of where board games kind of like do damage. That's not the only thing.
No, it's not. And just to speak on the idea of like deluxifying, like, we do think of these things where we think it's more luxe, but really it is just the cheaper option. Like, putting plastic on a board game is going to make it shiny and pretty, but it's really the cheapest thing that you could possibly put on that box. While if you went with a linen wrap, which is something that like Haba does, they use an actual linen, which is like a cloth, and it's printed right on it. That's very, very durable, and it's luxe. Like, linen is like old school, high quality material, and it does literally cost more, but it is biodegradable and highly durable. So, I mean, it's like the perfect material to make board game boxes out of, and it's true quality. And I don't know, I think that a lot of people, well, not a lot of people, but like we all are kind of fooled for these cheap swaps that really don't bring quality to our game, or don't make the experience better necessarily.
They bring
but
appeal.
they are
They bring
just
aesthetic appeal.
They bring appeal, yeah.
And also, and I'm educating myself about this as well. I don't know if you're gonna have a special on this, but adhesive.
Hmm.
You know, the
I don't know a
adhesives.
lot about it yet, but
So
tell me,
they
tell me more.
adhesives don't biodegrade. Like, you know, like, and
Oh, like the
so
glues.
yeah, the glue, it doesn't biodegrade. So like everything is glued. If it's a cardboard, it's glued. If it's cards, you know,
Yeah.
a lot of the cards are glued to like magic cards. Like, I mean, we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar industry. Like, you know, they're glued together, and that glue does not biodegrade, at least
Mm,
now. So like, you know, and you can tell when a card is flimsy. You can tell when a card is, you know, it doesn't shuffle well and whatever. So like they've kind of pushed things in towards this technology where it's like, okay, they're sturdier and they'll last long and all kind of stuff, but at what cost?
yeah, but at what cost? Another big thing that we really need to focus on is the responsibly sourcing of materials.
Right.
I think a lot of people, like when you think about your board game, you just see the finished product and you forget like almost everything. If it's not plastic, it came from a tree.
Mm.
And it's an entire industry based on byproduct of trees. And yet the conversation around whether these trees are responsibly sourced, how are the communities being treated, where these trees are coming from, there's really a big black hole as to what is going on there. Now, in the EU, there is a lot more sustainable foresting. There's a lot more trees set aside just for manufacturing. It is a different mentality and mindset. And in China, the manufacturing is just set up different. There's a lot of like the trees would come maybe from the cheapest source available, or maybe coming from a situation. I have heard different publishers say that, or not publishers, but different people who work in the industry say that some manufacturers do actually have trees near their factory and they use those trees, but are they using all the trees for the paper in my board game, or is it a mixture? Where's the rest of the wood from? And when you look at the fact that not a lot of our board games actually use recycled fibers, which was really striking to me. Again, in the EU, it's a much higher content of recycled fibers. Recycling is much more prominent and common and like just part of their system there. So most board games, at least at Ludofact, they use 95% recycled fibers. Like they know that. And then the rest of it, they need to kind of mix in to like get a good mixture of fibers. So they'll use a virgin paper. But in China, it's a little harder to know. I know two different manufacturers. One uses 30%, the other one uses 8% recycled fibers. So what's the rest of the fibers coming from? What type of wood is that? Are we seeing forest like being clear cut for that wood? We don't know. I mean, we would hope not, but when you're dealing with companies or when you're dealing with people making profit off of nature, I mean, you almost have to assume the worst, or you have to guard against the worst, because people will do what they have to make a profit.
So once again, I'm going to come back to this theme over and over again. This idea that, you know, why are we having these conversations? Why are we talking about, you know, the virgin plastics? Why are we talking about linens? Why are we talking about all these things? You know, we're not doing it to bump people out. I mean, I think I want to address that catastrophe instinct that like we want people to play flimsy, ugly games. And like that's what the environment thing is all about. It's like, okay, let's just take away all the great looking stuff and have like flimsy, ugly games.
No.
You mentioned before, and we can now start to turn to the good news. You had what I think it wasn't, I don't know if it was the CEO of Ludofact, but definitely representative on your show.
Oh yeah, he's one of the salesmen, one of the sales guys. Yeah.
And he
Or
started
project managers. Yeah. Sorry.
and this is where you know talked about some of this stuff and the idea that if we're going to push for change, it starts with the consumer. We have to ask. Like that message came out loud and clear. But like we have to ask, and B, we have to know what to ask for.
Yeah, because I mean, I've been interviewing different people that had different jobs in the industry, publishers, manufacturers, designers, and they've all said we listen to the consumers. We want to hear what they want, at least when it comes to these options, like these different options. So if people want the spot UV, that's what they will produce. If people want more plastic miniatures, that's what they will produce. But if there is a movement, or if there is more attention on responsibly sourced paper, guess what? That's what they will look for. That's what they will invest in, and that's what they will produce. Like, it goes both ways. And if people start saying, hey, maybe I like my game exactly the way it is, I just don't need that spot UV stuff. I don't, it's fine. I don't need it. Make the tree huggers happy, cut it out. Then guess what? They're gonna drop it. They're gonna stop putting that on board games. So, you know, it's exciting to think about if people realize, like, yeah, we have a whole lot of big problems in these worlds, but we also can do stuff about it. And it's not going to change the whole game. It's not going to change the industry, except to make it like more sustainable.
Right.
Then why not? Like, it's not going to change it for the worse.
Yeah, we're not gonna get uglier games. Like we're past that. There's no way we're gonna be playing. So like okay, actually, we'll check this out. So for the podcast listeners, I'm reaching for a game. This is called Race for the Treasure. This is from a group called Peaceable Kingdom. I don't know if they're still making games or whatever, but like they're like, see, it has this little thing, 100% green inside. Right?
That's awesome.
And it's totally awesome, but this thing is flimsy.
Oh, that's so good.
Like it's super, I mean, if this is cool for a kid's game, but I think the fear is that something like this, like if the tree huggers had their way, that like every game would be as flimsy as this. I mean, it is not. It's a very kind of flimsy box, and the cards or whatever. So I think the fear is that, like, I come here for escape. And it's a middle class hobby, like you mentioned before. Like, there's a lot of people with money that are in this hobby, and they want to buy an experience with their money, and they're like, okay, I'm not going to buy this, and therefore it won't be my hobby anymore. And that's where a lot of the fear and the backlash comes from. And what you're saying is, like, I love the way you're breaking it down, because you're trying to be really smart about it. Like, you're trying to be like, okay, here's a thing that we can talk about, and say, okay, spot UVD really that doesn't add to the game. Right. I mean, and looking a little bit deeper, maybe we can kind of push innovation, because that's how we're, it's not like, I think, I don't want to be less, like I want to innovate. It's like, okay, let's get a thing that we can, because these things don't come from nowhere. Like, the recycling is an innovation, and, linens, this is all innovations. And like, so like to push further in that direction. Yeah. So like, I don't want to go back. I don't want to like have all play children's games, but I would like to have this conversation help inspire within the community. For that.
Well, what I'd like people to think about is, like, think about the games that we were playing 10 years ago. The games that we were playing 10, 15 years ago were way more eco-friendly than they are now. And they're great. And they're still in your bookshelf, or your game shelf, and you still play them. And they were games that were produced in Germany. Some of them may have had FFC wood, and some of them have linen covers on. Like, this is old school, like, production, and it's more eco-friendly. It doesn't have lots of plastic. It doesn't have plastic inserts. The things that are most harmful are the things that are becoming more trendy. And if we really got rid of them, we would be going back to basics, but that could be good. That could be good, and it could still be quality. And like, I realize that maybe publishers and manufacturers aren't a fan of that, because they won't make so much money, but that's, maybe where we need to I don't know, that doesn't sound good. It's not necessarily true. So, yeah,
like, put it this way, like we're shipping from China, right? So talk about, like, board game manufacturers outsource their shipping from China, right? Because it's cheaper, and they can make more money by shipping the goods in from China as opposed to making it locally. What we're finding is that, you check in that shipping bill that came in last year, that, the container is now worth 12 times of whatever it is, or, other things are kind of getting in there. So it's like you reach for that honey pot of profit, and it's like, you might get bit. And so the So like, you know, having companies kind of think about, okay, when you reach for the short-term honeypot, then the answer is obvious, but is it worth reaching for the short-term honeypot? Can you figure out how to, you know, do a game that may have been of the same quality that released 10 years? It's a really nice game 10 years. Days of Wonder was doing really good work. 10 years ago,
Yeah, and I mean, I also think that a lot of publishers are kind of in a weird situation where they aren't actually able to sustain their business anymore because they can't afford to get their games back
right.
from China because of the shipping issues. And maybe it would be more sustainable and more eco-friendly to produce games in the US maybe, or
Right.
more localized, or, you know, in Europe,
And that's super hard, and that's something that I had Andrew Navarro on, because the developed nations have kind of like slipped on that capacity. Like we've definitely, like, you know, let China be the world's factory. So like it would take a sea change, and so like we can say that, but we don't say that lightly. We don't say that like, okay, well, just do it tomorrow. Like, you know, to really invest and start with small card games, or start with, you know, these other things that you can do, partnerships, where it's like, okay, start producing locally, and to begin that process, and on our part to help the audience build up that demand, you know, like, and if
yeah.
and make it you know, help people understand that, like, we're not just yelling and screaming and making people feel bad. uh we are
No,
trying to
no.
like really you know, persuade
Yeah,
folks to
and
want
to
this.
also bring new solutions
Yes.
to problems that people are just naturally having that like would be more sustainable, not only for the environment but for better business. Like
Mhm.
for example, you can pursue like public like manufacturing in the EU. And if you, for example, Germany is very green energy conscious. And Ludofact, they do 100% green energy, like no joke. They have windmills, they have solar panels, and that was something that the founder was truly passionate about. But now, you know, think about it, all your Ticket to Ride games are, you know, made in a factory that was powered by solar and wind. Like,
Mhm.
I know that's mind-boggling to think about, but it's true. Like, they're actually making it work. So there are brands that are doing it differently, and I think that even China, like, I don't mean to like say that all manufacturing in China is bad, but it's just not as sustainable because they
Mhm.
don't have the networks available, they don't have the resources available, and they are used to companies coming to them for the lowest dollar. Like, they are used to that, so they're used to pinching their workers to, you know, work for the lowest fee and for
Mhm.
getting supplies for the lowest fee. We really got to raise the bar and say, no, we actually want you to make this game, and we want you to make it, you know, high quality, and it doesn't have to be with the cheapest material you can possibly find.
Mhm.
um yeah,
Yeah.
but again, that's like an idealistic world, I guess.
We are gonna. I
But
think it just helps to for all of us to do a little bit, and for all of us to be educated, for
yeah,
all of us to, you know, kind of, because this is going to happen, right? I mean, like, you know, there's going to be a giant iceberg that falls into the Atlantic Ocean, and like we're going to have these big old things. Like, we've already gotten climate change, we've already gotten wildfires that are out of control. We're already on this path, right? You mentioned before, like this train that's going. So it's like, okay, uh, rather than despair, and I'm a
yeah,
psychotherapist, like, and we're all this whole therapy conversation
yeah,
has been about like, okay, let's not despair, let's do what we
mhm,
can. And it
yeah,
really, if we were to kind of build a movement within the board game industry to ask for this stuff, and to push companies to innovate, or to step back from the demand, like stop sticking your hand in the honeypot so much, for
yeah,
of like, you know, cheap deluxe vacation, you know, on the consumer end and the publisher. And if we can kind of walk back from that, that would actually make a difference. It would make an impact, you
it
know,
would,
and
yeah,
it might spur an innovation that helps along. And, you know, because you know, print companies don't just make board games, they make all sorts of stuff. So then if
right,
they
right,
learn how to make something else,
yeah,
that, you know, the ripple effects are positive. So like, I really want to end on a hopeful note,
yeah,
you know?
absolutely. And actually, my series that I talk about sustainability is called Across the Board, and my real vision for that is to see people look at the environment in a different way and to look at it, like to think about it in their everyday life. And I feel like if someone who maybe doesn't normally think about the environment, but when they look at their game, they're like, oh, that could be more eco-friendly, then maybe the next time they go to buy clothing, they could buy something that, you know, was made
Right.
with 100% organic cotton, then instead of something that had maybe synthetic fibers. And these little changes make a big difference. And eventually across the board, everyone will be making smaller or small steps towards sustainability. So
Oh,
that's really
fast
the
fashion.
vision.
That's a whole nother show.
That's a whole other thing. But it's small steps. Like, yeah, maybe you don't buy the sweater made out of polyester and you buy the one made out of wool, and it's a small thing.
And
But
don't
they
change
add
your
up.
closet out every 3 months.
Yeah.
We can go
Yeah.
into the whole thing.
Yeah, just use what you have. Yeah. But, and I feel like the idea, like when I first started talking about this, it was just obscene. People were like, you can't talk about this in board gaming. This is my hobby. You know, it doesn't matter. It's a drop in the bucket. You know, get out of here, whatever. But in my mind, I was like, yeah, but it's just another small step. We could all just do something little and it could make a big difference. And I don't want to keep investing in an industry that doesn't care about the environment. This is my spending money. And like, I care about this. I'm not going to invest my money into something that like is going to make me sad when I look at all the plastic. So like, I want people to know, like, it doesn't mean that everything has to change. It's just like doing one thing differently. Maybe a brand, maybe a publisher just says like, okay, well, we're going to use, you know, paper packaging instead of bubble wrap for the packaging. One step, that's great. I love it. You know, maybe someone's like, we're going to boycott spot UV. One step. I love it. You know, it just takes people talking about it, and hopefully it'll spread.
Yeah, and we're going to continue to have these conversations. You know, in a spirit of education and compassion. That's the whole point of Good Trouble, and I think we've, you know, that we've begun it, and then we're going to keep on doing it. But One Pip Wonder, Jona, tell the people where they can reach you.
Oh, sure. Yeah, you can check out my channel, One Pip Wonder, and I do board game reviews. I talk about the environmental impacts of the board games I review, and I also have a lot of people come on the channel to talk about sustainability. And yeah, so you can check me out there or shoot me an email. Yeah.
onepipwonder@gmail.com.
Yeah.
Straight up.
Yep.
Jona Minotto, thank you so much for taking the time. This was a pleasure.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me.
If you can change your mind, you can change the world, people. So until next time, later, everybody.
Bye.